There are rhythms in life that most people never notice. Subtle loops, woven beneath the ordinary moments. You wake up, have your coffee, go through the day, and somehow, things feel familiar. Not just because of routine, but something deeper. You meet different people, but the same emotional script seems to play out. The settings change, but the storyline feels oddly repetitive. Some call it coincidence, some call it fate. But what if it's something else? What if it's your soul whispering through repetition, trying to get your attention? We often think of karma as some cosmic scoreboard. Do good, get good. Do bad, get bad. But karma, in its most intimate form, is not about punishment or reward. It's about memory. Not just mental memory, but soul memory. Imprints of intention echoing across lifetimes, shaping how we see, feel, choose, and react. In our last exploration, we looked at the last digit of your birth year as a symbol, a karmic hint about the emotional and generational patterns you're working through. But that was just the surface. Today, we step into a deeper layer, the hidden architecture of your full birth date. Because certain struggles don't just visit your life once. They return, over and over again, not because you're cursed, not because you're broken, but because something within you is asking to be understood. Modern psychology would call this subconscious programming. The brain, after all, is designed to repeat what feels familiar, even if what's familiar is painful. Attachment theory speaks to how our earliest emotional bonds shape our future ones. Behavioral science talks about conditioning and neural loops. And all of this is true. But from a Buddhist perspective, there's something even deeper at play: karma as pattern consciousness. Not just what happened in this life, but the energetic residue of all your past intentions. They live in your mind stream. They show up as tendencies, attractions, fears, and habits. And they don't disappear just because you want them to. They linger. They loop. They repeat until seen. Karma is like gravity, silent, neutral, consistent. It doesn't get you for doing something wrong. It reflects, like a mirror. If you yell at a mirror, it doesn't yell back. It just shows you your face. And the universe, through karma, shows you your tendencies, again and again. Not to shame you, but to awaken you. This is where Buddhist psychology becomes incredibly empowering. It says, what remains unconscious becomes destiny. Not because destiny is written in stone, but because what's unseen continues to operate beneath the surface. But once you bring it into awareness, you have a choice. And that's the beginning of freedom. This is the practice of mindfulness, not just to relax, but to see clearly, to notice, here comes that old story again, that urge to please, to push, to control, to disappear. And in that moment of noticing, something new becomes possible. In Buddhist terms, this cycle of repetition is known as samsara, the wheel of habitual becoming. But here's the nuance. Samsara isn't the villain. It's the curriculum. It's the very repetition that invites awakening. And this is where your birth date enters the scene, not just as a number, but as a code. Across traditions, from Buddhist numerology to Vedic systems to Pythagorean thought, there's a shared understanding. Numbers carry energy. Not magic, not prediction, but vibration. Symbol, frequency. Your birth date, then, is a kind of vibrational blueprint. A karmic signature that reflects the themes your soul came here to explore. It's not fate. It's a mirror. And what it reflects can guide you, not because it tells you what will happen, but because it points to the patterns that keep happening until you respond differently. Take a moment to consider this. What if the challenges in your life aren't obstacles, but invitations? What if that same painful relationship pattern is not a sign that something is wrong with you, but a message asking, are you ready to meet this part of yourself with new eyes? What if your impatience, your fear, your people-pleasing, your need for control, what if none of it is shameful? What if it's all part of your curriculum? Not to be judged, but to be seen. In Buddhist teachings, there's a term called vipaka, the fruit of karma. It means that what you experience isn't just about what happens, but how you receive it. Two people can live through the same event. One breaks, one blooms. Not because of luck, but because of inner readiness. This is why karmic patterns aren't only external. The real loop is internal. And that's good news, because what's inside can be transformed. Here's where it gets fascinating. When you start looking at your full birth date, not just the year, but the full combination of day, month, and year, you can calculate what's known as your karmic number. This number, according to ancient spiritual systems, is not random. It's a symbolic pointer toward the inner work your soul is here to engage in. Think of it like a fingerprint, unique, subtle, rich with meaning. Each number from 1 to 9 carries a symbolic energy, not a fixed personality, not a box, but a theme, a frequency, a direction. And when you understand your number, something clicks. The story of your life starts making more sense. You realize, of course, I keep facing issues with trust or power or freedom or overgiving. Not because you're flawed, but because this is the soul's assignment in this lifetime. Not to suffer through it, but to transform it. And once you begin seeing your life through that lens, everything changes. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? You start asking, what part of me is this asking to grow? That's the shift. That's the awakening. And that's when the karmic loop starts to loosen. The same struggle becomes a doorway. The same trigger becomes a mirror. And the same old story becomes the soil of your transformation. And this is the beauty of Buddhist-inspired spiritual tools. They don't try to predict your future. They invite you into your present, with more clarity, with more compassion, with more choice. Because ultimately, life is not a series of random events. It is a sacred, spiraling dance of lessons, invitations, and remembrance. And your birth date, this ordinary piece of information, is a key, not to a fixed destiny, but to a deeper understanding of who you are, why you're here, and how to live this one precious life with more wisdom and grace. In the rest of this journey, we'll walk through how to discover your karmic number. We'll explore its meaning, not as dogma, but as mirror. Because your life isn't asking for perfection, it's asking for presence. Demystifying karma, a Buddhist perspective. Karma is a word that often arrives carrying baggage. In the West, it's frequently reduced to a sort of spiritual scoreboard or cosmic justice machine, something that dishes out rewards and punishments in some divine tit-for-tat. That's karma. People say with a shrug, when someone cuts in traffic and then gets pulled over, it's often spoken with a smug satisfaction, as if the universe just served justice. But this is not what karma truly means. Not in the Buddhist tradition. Not in the heart of the teachings that gave the concept its depth. Karma, in its essence, means action. More specifically, it refers to intentional action, the motive behind what we do, think, and say. In Buddhist philosophy, it's not just the doing that matters. It's the quality of consciousness that fuels the doing. Every intention, no matter how small, leaves a trace, a subtle imprint on the mind. And over time, these imprints shape the architecture of our reality. Think of it this way. Your mind is like a field, and karma is the seed you plant with each moment of thought, speech, or action. You don't always see the fruit right away, but the seed is there, resting in the soil of consciousness, waiting for the right conditions to sprout. And when it does, we may not remember planting it, but we are still the gardener. Imagine dropping a stone into a still pond. The ripples spread outward, even long after the stone disappears beneath the surface. Karma works the same way. It doesn't vanish when the moment ends. It reverberates through your habits, your relationships, your perceptions. This is not punishment. This is physics. This is consciousness in motion. Importantly, karma is not deterministic. That's a critical misunderstanding. Karma is not fate. It's potential, dynamic, responsive, constantly evolving based on your awareness. In fact, this is one of the most empowering aspects of Buddhist wisdom. Karma can be transformed. Every moment becomes a fork in the road, a chance to plant a new kind of seed. Just because you reacted with anger yesterday does not mean you are condemned to react that way today. Just because a fear-based decision created suffering in the past doesn't mean it must shape your future. Karma is a map, not a trap. This understanding restores our power. It returns agency to the individual, not in the Western sense of absolute free will, but in a more nuanced, compassionate way. You are not stuck. You are not broken. You are evolving. And with each act of mindfulness, with each pause before speaking, each breath before reacting, you can shift the trajectory of your karma. Why do the same emotional triggers seem to show up again and again? Why do you feel pulled into the same kinds of arguments, relationships, or regrets? Karma doesn't offer blame. It offers insight. These aren't random events. They're invitations. And they show up because something in you is ready to grow, to resolve, to release. Modern psychology has caught up to this in many ways. What therapists call attachment style, Buddhist monks might describe as karmic residue. What we label trauma cycles can be seen, through the Buddhist lens, as deeply ingrained karmic loops. Energies left unresolved, returning for resolution. Whether you call it metacognition or mindfulness, the core truth is the same. You cannot change what you do not see. But once you see it, healing begins. And with that awareness comes compassion, not just for others, but for yourself. When you realize that everyone, yourself included, is acting from layers of unseen karma, you start to soften. You stop labeling people as bad or selfish and begin to see the wounds beneath the behavior, the longing beneath the anger, the fear beneath the control. This doesn't mean we excuse harm, but it does mean we stop adding judgment on top of pain. It means we become curious rather than reactive, gentle rather than harsh. This is one of karma's greatest teachings. Compassion is clarity in action. When we apply that same clarity inward, self-forgiveness becomes possible. You realize that the choices you regret were made from the level of awareness you had at the time. And that's not a loophole, it's a doorway. A doorway to a more conscious, more compassionate you. The Buddha once said, "You are the heir to your karma." This isn't meant as a threat, it's an invitation. You inherit the momentum of your past, yes, but you also inherit the tools to shift it. And that begins with seeing your patterns not as shameful, but as instructive. Karma is not here to shame you into silence. It's here to wake you into wisdom. One of the most radical aspects of Buddhist thought is that karma is morally neutral. It is not a cosmic judge handing down sentences. It simply reflects cause and effect. That's why karma is often described as a mirror, not a verdict. A mirror doesn't yell at you. It just shows you what is. And the more clearly you can see what is, the more consciously you can respond. This means that every repetition, every loop you find yourself in, isn't proof that you're failing. It's proof that the lesson hasn't been fully understood yet. And that yet is powerful. It contains hope. It contains the seed of liberation. In fact, one of the great gifts of karma is that it returns again and again, not to punish you, but to give you another chance to respond with presence, to respond with choice, to respond not from habit, but from awareness. And when you begin to respond differently, the loop starts to loosen. What was once a cycle becomes a spiral, ascending, evolving. Some karmas ripen quickly, others unfold across years or lifetimes. But all of them, if met with attention and insight, become fuel for awakening. There's a Tibetan word, nyam, that refers to the personal, embodied experience of a teaching, not just intellectual understanding, but felt transformation. And this is what the study of karma offers. Not just a theory of behavior, but a living invitation to explore the texture of your own mind, your own habits, your own history. And here's where your birth date enters the conversation. From a Buddhist-inspired numerological view, your date of birth carries a symbolic signature, a kind of karmic imprint pointing to your soul's recurring themes. It's not destiny in a rigid sense, but it's meaningful. It reflects tendencies that, if brought into consciousness, can become pathways to healing. Understanding karma at this depth doesn't make life easier, but it does make it more meaningful. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and begin asking, "What is this asking from me?" That single shift turns pain into practice, confusion into clarity, karma into curriculum. So the next time you catch yourself in a familiar spiral, pause. Don't rush to label it as a mistake. Don't condemn yourself for repeating the same argument, the same fear, the same escape route. Instead, see it as a mirror, a message, an opening. And remember, karma is not what happens to you. Karma is how you meet what happens. And that difference changes everything. Karmic numbers, your soul's spiritual blueprint. There's a quiet rhythm running beneath your life. You might not notice it at first, but it's there. In the way certain challenges keep returning, in the familiar emotional echoes that seem to follow you from one stage of life to the next. Some people call it coincidence, others call it fate. But from a spiritual lens, these repetitions often point to something more profound, an unspoken lesson your soul is still trying to learn. You may have grown, you've evolved, done the inner work, learned the language of healing and resilience. And still, the same themes come back, not as punishment, but as an invitation. You're not doing life wrong. You're simply circling back to a deeper layer of your curriculum. The lessons are not linear. They spiral. They return when your soul is ready for more. Hidden within your date of birth is a clue, a quiet code, a karmic number derived from the sum of your full birth date that offers insight into what your soul came here to explore, embody, and ultimately transcend. This number isn't random. It's a vibrational key, one that helps decode the underlying spiritual blueprint you were born with. Ancient traditions, from Vedic wisdom to Buddhist psychology and even Pythagorean numerology, share this intuitive belief that numbers are more than math. They are metaphors, frequencies, symbolic archetypes that point us toward deeper truths. And your karmic number, distilled from your date of birth, is one such symbol. It doesn't tell your fortune. It tells your orientation, your default patterns, your spiritual friction, your untapped medicine. Think of it this way. The birth date is not a verdict. It's a map, not a fixed path, but a terrain marked with the challenges, themes, and possibilities that your soul chose to engage with in this lifetime. Your karmic number is not your identity. It's a mirror, a compass, a whisper from the soul. Let's pause and clarify. This is not about superstition. It's not about assigning you a label and expecting your life to fit inside it. It's about reflection, awareness. It's a tool, not a cage. And like all tools in the Buddhist path, it's meant to liberate, not limit. The process is deceptively simple. Add your day, month, and year of birth together, reducing the sum to a single digit, between 1 and 9. Each of these numbers carries a specific archetypal energy, a spiritual task your soul is working through in this incarnation. For example, a karmic number 1 often signifies themes of independence and ego transcendence. A number 6 might revolve around boundaries and service. A number may 8 call you to explore your relationship to power and responsibility. But this is not about prediction, it's about presence. By understanding your karmic number, you start to see the recurring patterns in your life with new eyes. Those emotional loops you thought were personal failures, they begin to look like spiritual themes. That fear of abandonment, that compulsive need for control, that recurring financial struggle, that relentless desire to be seen. These are not random wounds. They are parts of the deeper story your soul is trying to reconcile. And this perspective can be life-changing. Instead of feeling broken, you feel entrusted. Instead of asking, "Why me?" you start asking, "What is this showing me?" That simple shift in questioning dissolves shame. It reclaims your agency. Suddenly, you're not trapped in the same old loop. You're standing in the center of it, with new vision and deeper compassion. Carl Jung famously said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The karmic number is one way to make the unconscious visible. It doesn't diagnose, it illuminates. And that illumination, from the Buddhist view, is the first step toward awakening. Modern psychology confirms this. When people are able to name and understand their patterns, they're more likely to change them. Naming is the beginning of liberation. And spiritual tools like numerology can act as symbolic mirrors, offering us not an answer, but a clearer question. This is why Buddhist teachings emphasize the importance of insight. In Sanskrit, the word vipassana means clear seeing. When you apply clear seeing to your karmic tendencies, you move from reactivity to response, from compulsion to choice, and from unconscious habit to conscious evolution. Let's say your karmic number is 3. You may find that your life is filled with creativity, expression, and charm, but you struggle with emotional depth, follow-through, or facing discomfort. That doesn't mean you're doomed to repeat these traits. It simply means they are your soul's current curriculum. And the moment you see the pattern, the lesson becomes yours to master. Or maybe your number is 7, a seeker's number. You might feel deeply introspective, drawn to spirituality, but struggle with isolation or cynicism. Again, it's not a sentence. It's a signal. And once seen clearly, it can become your strength. Each karmic number holds both a shadow and a light. The shadow is where we cling. The light is where we release. The karmic number invites us into balance. It doesn't flatten our individuality. It highlights the flavor of our journey. Understanding this number is also a form of compassion. You begin to realize that your wounds are not evidence of brokenness, but of depth. Your struggles are not defects, but doorways. You came here with specific terrain to walk, and your karmic number gives clues about that terrain. And when you begin to trust the rhythm of your own soul's journey, something beautiful happens. The urgency fades. The shame softens. The journey deepens. You stop trying to escape the pattern and instead begin to dance with it, wisely, gently, consciously. This, too, is a form of liberation, a subtle but profound freedom. You're no longer pushing against your life. You're walking with it, learning from it, and in doing so, transforming it from the inside out. Let's also remember, your karmic number isn't the only thing that defines your spiritual path. It's a starting point, a symbolic key. Like any spiritual teaching, it works when it's used as a mirror, not a prison. It becomes dangerous only when used to stereotype or over-identify. But when held lightly, with discernment and humility, it becomes a powerful tool for reflection. And this tool is most powerful when used with mindfulness. Buddhist practice always returns us to presence, to the breath, the moment, the next conscious choice. Your karmic number offers context, but presence offers change. The two work together, insight and practice, symbol and silence, knowing and being. So now we return to the question, what is your karmic number trying to show you? Perhaps it's time to revisit those old emotional wounds, not as scars, but as messages. Perhaps it's time to stop asking, how do I fix myself? And instead ask, how can I meet myself more fully? Because from the Buddhist perspective, healing doesn't come from escape, it comes from embrace. The path out is the path through. When you view your karmic number in this light, it becomes sacred, not magical, but meaningful. It becomes a gentle guide, a reminder that your soul is not lost. It's learning, and that learning is worthy, valid, and deeply human. There is no perfect number. There is no better or worse path. There is only your path, your curriculum, your unique dance with consciousness. And when you begin to walk that path with awareness, even the hardest struggles become bearers of grace. So take a breath. Look again. Feel what your life is showing you. You are not here by accident. You are not repeating for no reason. You are remembering, slowly, gently, powerfully, who you truly are. And your karmic number? It's not your identity. It's your invitation to see more clearly, to love more deeply, and to walk your path, not with fear, but with presence. The journey through numbers 1 to 9. Each karmic number from 1 to 9 holds more than just a spiritual tone. It carries the memory of your soul's intention and the blueprint for its evolution. Think of them not as labels, but as energetic invitations, each whispering, "This is where your healing lies. This is where your gift hides in plain sight." Numbers, in this view, are not mere mathematics. They are sacred vibrations, archetypal mirrors reflecting your deepest patterns and possibilities. Let's begin by entering the energy of number 1 with more depth. The soul who carries the vibration of 1 is often learning to stand in their own center. This path is not just about independence, it's about sovereignty. They came into this life to find the courage to be fully themselves in a world that often rewards conformity. And yet, their shadow is loneliness. Because being a pioneer means walking where no one has walked before, and that path can feel isolating. The ego might try to mask this with self-importance, but the deeper teaching of the 1 is humility. True leadership begins not with authority, but with presence, the kind that inspires, not commands. Number 2 offers a contrast, the soul of the harmonizer. Their sensitivity is both their superpower and their burden. Empathy flows through them like water, effortlessly, beautifully. But without boundaries, they begin to lose themselves in the emotions of others. Their lesson is balance, to hold space for connection without dissolving into it. Many 2s find themselves in helping professions or deeply entangled relationships, often wondering why they feel drained. But when this number is lived consciously, it becomes a wellspring of healing. The 2 doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. Their true power is quiet presence, the kind that sees you without judgment. The energy of 3 bursts onto the scene like sunlight after a storm. Expressive, charming, and endlessly creative, these souls often feel called to create beauty from emotion. They are the artists, the storytellers, the communicators. But their challenge is focus. Because their minds are kaleidoscopic, their energy can become scattered, jumping from project to project, idea to idea, without grounding. The spiritual work of the 3 is to bring depth to their creativity, to resist the urge to perform and instead create from vulnerability. When a 3 allows their inner truth to speak, rather than just entertain, their words and art become medicine. The soul carrying number 4 is often misunderstood. They may seem rigid, overly practical, or even controlling. But beneath that structure lies a deep desire for safety, not just for themselves, but for those they love. These are the builders of the spiritual world, the ones who take lofty ideals and anchor them in form. Their karma is often tied to control. When life feels chaotic, they tighten their grip. But life's deeper invitation to the 4 is trust. Trust in the unknown. Trust that not all foundations are visible. When they learn to surrender while still building with intention, their life becomes a sanctuary not just for them, but for others. Now we step into the wild heart of number 5. This number carries the restless energy of the seeker, the explorer, the one who resists being pinned down. Many who carry 5 feel allergic to routine. They chase novelty, new cities, new ideas, new relationships, not always out of joy, but sometimes to escape stillness. Their karmic lesson is commitment. not in the sense of being tied down, but in the sense of being fully present. To commit to a moment, a purpose, a path, not forever, but long enough to let it change you. When the 5 learns to root their wings, they discover that freedom isn't the absence of responsibility. It's the ability to show up fully, then let go gracefully. Each number, as we can already feel, contains both a burden and a blessing. It's not about fixing who you are. It's about remembering that your challenges are part of the design. They're not signs that something is wrong. They're clues that point you home. In the next part of this journey, we'll explore numbers 6 through 9 in equal depth. And then, we'll begin weaving these insights together, understanding how each number speaks not just to the individual soul, but to the collective evolution of consciousness. But for now, pause and reflect. Which number spoke to you most so far? Not necessarily because it matches your birth calculation, but because it felt familiar. The truth is, we carry pieces of all these patterns within us. Your karmic number simply shines a brighter light on the area where you are most invited to grow. This is not numerology for entertainment. It's soul work. And every time you recognize a pattern, every time you choose differently, the spiral of your life shifts direction, just slightly, but meaningfully. Awareness is never wasted. Even the smallest noticing is a step off the wheel of repetition and into the spiral of becoming. Let's continue walking together. Now we step into the nurturing embrace of number 6. This karmic vibration often manifests in those who feel deeply responsible for others' well-being. From a young age, they may find themselves in caregiving roles, emotionally, physically, or spiritually. They offer love with a devotion that can feel almost sacred. But here lies the challenge: overgiving without receiving, helping without asking, loving without limits. When the 6 forgets their own needs, their compassion curdles into martyrdom. Resentment grows where boundaries should have been. The spiritual teaching of number 6 is this: love that excludes the self is not sustainable. True service is not sacrifice, it's overflow. When a 6 includes themselves in the circle of care, their nurturing becomes a gift to the world, not a burden to their soul. The vibration of 7 shifts the energy inward. These are the seekers of meaning, the philosophers, the mystics, often introspective, analytical, and spiritually curious. The 7 moves through life as though deciphering a cosmic riddle. Solitude is their sanctuary. Reflection is their fuel. But in that very gift lies a trap: isolation. The 7's spiritual arrogance can make them believe that others cannot understand them, or worse, that they don't need others at all. Their journey, then, is not just inward, it's relational. They must learn to bring their depth out into the world, not as dogma, but as dialogue. When the 7 allows their wisdom to be seen and shared, it becomes nourishment, not just knowledge. Their insight turns from guarded truth into communal awakening. With number 8, the karmic current flows into the realm of power. These are souls who are here to explore ambition, leadership, and mastery over material forms. In previous lifetimes, or earlier in this one, they may have experienced imbalance around power, either through misuse or fear of it. That's why many 8s swing between extremes, overasserting themselves or shrinking back entirely. Their lesson is integration. Power, when rooted in ego, dominates. But when rooted in purpose, it uplifts. The 8 must align their drive with their dharma, remembering that true success is measured not in status, but in service. When the 8 leads from wholeness, they become not just successful, but significant. Their presence leaves an imprint far beyond what can be counted. Finally, we meet the soul of number 9, the old soul. Those who carry this number often feel like they've lived many lifetimes in one. They're drawn to causes greater than themselves: healing, justice, art, spiritual transformation. Their hearts are wide open, but that very openness can make them vulnerable to burnout, codependency, and existential fatigue. The 9 must learn to give without draining, to release without regret, and to love without attachment. Their karma is tied to forgiveness of others, yes, but often of themselves. Many nines carry deep grief for the world's pain. They feel it in their bones. But their calling is not to fix the world. It's to serve it with joy, compassion, and humility. The nine completes the karmic cycle not with answers, but with presence. As we reflect on all 9 archetypes, we begin to see a sacred spiral of human evolution. From the emergence of self, 1, to the surrender into the whole, 9. These numbers map a journey of consciousness. You might find your karmic number highlights a core lesson, but that doesn't mean you're limited to it. We are multifaceted beings, and at different times, different numbers may become more prominent in our growth. The Buddhist understanding of interdependence reminds us that no quality arises alone. Courage, 1, needs compassion, 6. Freedom, 5, needs wisdom, 7. Power, 8, needs humility, 2. Every number balances and is balanced by another. That's why numerology, when approached from a dharmic lens, isn't about categorizing. It's about integrating. It invites us to hold the complexity of our human experience with more compassion and curiosity. Let's also remember that karmic numbers are not destinations. They are directional signs. They don't tell you who you are. They remind you who you are becoming. They ask you to observe your patterns, not to identify with them. Because awareness is the beginning of transformation. And in the act of noticing, truly noticing, the soul begins to awaken. In modern language, we might say karmic numbers are your growth edges. In Buddhist psychology, we might call them vasanas, latent tendencies shaped by past impressions. Either way, the invitation is the same. Meet these patterns with mindfulness. Don't run from your karmic curriculum. Study it. Sit with it. Let it teach you how to return to yourself. When you do, something beautiful happens. The patterns that once felt heavy begin to feel holy. The traits you once judged become your training ground. And the loops you thought you were stuck in become spirals of rising awareness. The journey through numbers 1 to 9 is not a test. It's a remembering of the soul's choice to come here, to experience, to evolve, to love, and to awaken. While each karmic number holds a distinct vibration, the deeper truth is that they do not exist in isolation. You are not simply a 4 or a 9. You are a symphony. The karmic number may be the loudest instrument in your soul's orchestra for now, but all 9 archetypes are within you. Life has a way of activating them when needed. Calling forth courage when you feel small, invoking surrender when you try to control, or stirring compassion where judgment once lived. This is why understanding karmic numbers is not about labeling, but about liberating. When you view your number through a Buddhist lens, the question shifts from "What am I?" to "What is life trying to teach me through this?" This subtle shift pulls you out of self-concept and into presence. You begin to realize the number is not your identity. It is your doorway. And what lies beyond that doorway is spacious, conscious, alive. So how can you work with this knowledge? First, not with obsession. This isn't a puzzle to solve. It's a language to listen to. Start by reflecting on the qualities of your number. Do they resonate? Are there moments in your life when this pattern has played out again and again? With gentle curiosity, track the emotional themes that return, the fears that linger beneath the surface, the instincts that guide your choices, the roles you're often cast into. Next, use your number as a mirror, not to judge, but to observe. How do its qualities manifest in both shadow and light? For instance, a karmic number may 5th crave freedom but struggle with intimacy. A number may 2nd be deeply loving but prone to losing themselves and others. When you see both sides clearly, your path forward becomes a practice of integration, not erasure. You're not trying to fix your number. You're learning to dance with it. Here's where modern psychology and Buddhist practice harmonize. Psychology gives us tools: journaling, therapy, inner child work, and emotional regulation. Buddhism gives us awareness, mindfulness, compassion, and non-attachment. Combined, they offer a path to transforming karma, not by resisting it, but by embracing it as your teacher. And you don't have to do this alone. Many people report that once they identify their karmic number, they begin to notice similar patterns in others. A partner with a karmic number may constantly seek control. A parent with a karmic number may give endlessly to the point of exhaustion. A child with a karmic number may express wildly, then retreat in fear. These observations can help cultivate empathy. You begin to understand. We're all just trying to meet our karma with grace. No one's ahead or behind. We're just on different points of the spiral. There's also something quietly profound that happens when you stop pathologizing your struggles and start revering them. What if the very traits you thought were your weaknesses were actually part of your soul's curriculum? What if your tendency to overthink wasn't a flaw, but a doorway into deeper wisdom? What if your restlessness wasn't a curse, but an invitation into freedom? This is how Buddhist numerology can become a practice of self-love. Not the inflated kind that says, "I'm perfect," but the honest kind that says, "I'm in process. I'm becoming. I am worthy of care even in my unfinishedness." At this stage in our journey, it's worth pausing and asking, why does this matter? Why dive into karmic numbers at all? Because we are meaning-making creatures. We long to understand ourselves not just psychologically, but spiritually. And when you begin to see your life through the lens of karmic archetypes, something ancient inside you exhales. It's like hearing your soul speak its native tongue. It's also profoundly empowering. The more you recognize your karmic patterns, the more you reclaim your authorship. You no longer move through life reacting, you respond. You choose with awareness. You stop blaming others for your pain and start asking, what is this pain pointing me toward? What part of me is ready to evolve? Buddhism teaches that all things arise and pass, even karma, even identity. The karmic number is not eternal. It's simply the next chapter of your soul's unfolding. When you learn its lesson, life will bring the next one. And slowly, you spiral upward, not escaping the human experience, but living it more skillfully, more kindly, more awake. Let this truth land deeply. Your karmic number is not your destiny. It is your dharma. It is the thread in the great tapestry that only you can weave. And by understanding it, by walking with it, by bowing to it, you bring something sacred into the world. You become more than a personality. You become a presence. And presence, dear one, is the beginning of true freedom. Freedom beyond fate. Karma as conscious choice. Fate is a word that both comforts and confines. It implies there is a plan, a meaning behind the chaos. But it can also make us feel powerless, like actors trapped in a script we never wrote. Many people approach karma this way, too, as if it's a destiny carved in stone, a force that dictates what we must endure. But the Buddhist view is radically different. Karma is not fate. It is feedback, and more importantly, it is fluid. In the teachings of the Buddha, karma simply means action, more precisely, intentional action. Not every sneeze or coincidence is karmic. It is the motivation behind the action, the quality of the mind at the moment of choice, that plants a karmic seed. That seed then ripens, not on a fixed timetable, but in response to conditions. This matters because it means karma isn't some invisible hand forcing outcomes. It's a dance between cause and awareness. It shifts when you shift. This distinction is crucial. If karma were fate, then spiritual work would be passive. But Buddhism teaches that liberation is possible precisely because karma can be transformed. It is not a life sentence. It is a learning curve. Yes, patterns from the past shape us, but they do not define us. Every moment of awareness, every mindful choice, plants new seeds, seeds that can sprout into an entirely different future. This is where the idea of conscious choice becomes revolutionary. To live with awareness is to participate in karma, not just receive it. And that participation begins in the smallest of spaces, the pause between stimulus and response. That's where freedom lives, not in changing the external world first, but in shifting how we relate to it. If someone criticizes you, karma isn't what they said. Karma is how you react. The mind that lashes out in anger creates one ripple. The mind that breathes and responds with clarity creates another. Same event, different outcome, based on choice. Modern neuroscience confirms this ancient insight. Our brains are shaped by repetition. The more we respond with fear, the more those neural pathways strengthen. But the opposite is also true. We can rewire the brain through new responses. This mirrors the Buddhist teaching that karma is not fixed. It's habit energy, vasana, and it can be interrupted. When you become conscious of your tendencies, you create the space to change them. Karma becomes less about punishment and more about presence. This doesn't mean the past is erased. Some karmic consequences are already in motion. Like a ball thrown through the air, some effects must play out. But how we meet them matters. The Buddha used a metaphor. A handful of salt in a cup makes the water undrinkable, but in a vast lake, the same salt dissolves. The salt is your karma. The lake is your mind. When your awareness grows, even bitter karma becomes bearable, not because it vanishes, but because you've expanded the space around it. And that expansion is not theoretical. It is deeply practical. It's the difference between spiraling into the same argument with your partner or pausing, breathing, and speaking with intention. It's the choice to observe your anxiety rather than be consumed by it. It's the decision to break a cycle of blame and step into a moment of responsibility. These are not grand gestures. They are everyday miracles. Each one bends the trajectory of karma by a degree, and over time, that degree becomes a new path. There's also a deeper liberation hidden in this approach. If karma is choice, then no one else can define your story. You are not your trauma. You are not your patterns. You are not your parents' wounds or your culture's conditioning. You are the one who sees all of that and chooses. That is, your true self. Not the bundle of inherited tendencies, but the awareness that beholds them. This is why the Buddha didn't promise immediate perfection. He promised a path, a gradual, unfolding freedom, cultivated one breath, one step, one choice at a time. And the beauty of this path is that it doesn't require ideal conditions. You don't need a peaceful life to practice peace. You don't need everyone to change so you can feel free. In fact, the very friction of life, the disappointments, the setbacks, the old triggers, is your curriculum. Karma isn't trying to punish you. It's trying to teach you. Every loop that repeats is an invitation to respond differently. And every time you do, you reclaim a little more of your power. Western psychology aligns with this view. Therapists speak of response flexibility, the ability to step out of reactivity and choose a new pattern. This mirrors what mindfulness cultivates. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, said it most simply. Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space lies our power to choose. In our choice lies our growth and our freedom. This is karma, not a prison, but a mirror. And when seen clearly, it becomes a portal. Some may wonder, but what about social injustice, oppression, or trauma we didn't choose? Buddhism does not deny these. In fact, it emphasizes compassion for suffering and the collective interdependence that shapes our lives. But even in the face of external conditions, your inner response remains yours. Karma doesn't mean blame. It means responsibility. And responsibility doesn't mean fault. It means the ability to respond. It's not about guilt. It's about growth. This is the heart of spiritual maturity. The willingness to meet life as it is and still choose alignment. To say, yes, this wound exists, and I will not let it define me. Yes, this pattern is old, and I will meet it with new eyes. Yes, this is hard, and still, I choose presence. In that moment, you become the author of your karma, not a victim of fate, but a participant in awakening. Remembering who you are, a call to awakening. There is a stillness that lives beneath the noise of your life, a presence that has watched you move through every joy and sorrow, without judgment, without agenda. It was there when you were born, and it will remain when all titles, identities, and roles fall away. This presence is not something you need to become. It is something you have forgotten. And the journey of awakening is not about adding more. It's about remembering who you are beneath the layers. Throughout this exploration of karmic patterns, numbers, and soul signatures, we followed a thread of ancient insight that you are not a random product of chance, but a living expression of consciousness unfolding through time. The loops of your life, those repeating emotions, choices, and challenges, are not punishments. They are messages. They are gentle, persistent whispers calling you to look deeper, to come home to the self that cannot be reduced to wounds or history. And now we arrive here, not at an ending, but at a beginning, a soft return. To remember is to remember, to reassemble the forgotten parts of yourself and hold them in awareness. The karmic number you carry, the patterns you've uncovered, the meanings you've sensed behind your birth date, none of it was ever meant to label you. It was meant to point to the mystery that cannot be labeled. That mystery is you. The Buddha did not teach doctrines to be believed in blindly. He offered tools to see clearly. Karma was not taught to scare, but to liberate. It reminds us that we are not trapped, but deeply influential in the story of our becoming. The life you have is not fixed. It is unfolding, breath by breath, shaped by how you meet each moment. Even the past is not dead. It lives through your attention and can be reshaped by your willingness to see it with fresh eyes. Perhaps you've been chasing healing like a finish line, thinking that one day you'll arrive, but awakening is not an arrival. It's a recognition, a noticing of what was always here, beneath the noise, beneath the striving. In the mirror of karmic insight, you begin to see you are not your pain, not your story, not even your personality. You are the space that holds all of it with compassion. You are the witness that remembers stillness even in chaos. You are the silence between breaths, and from that silence, something beautiful grows. Choice. Not the frantic grasping for a better identity, but the gentle choosing of what to embody next. Will you embody patience instead of anger? Compassion instead of fear? Presence instead of distraction? This is the quiet revolution of remembering, not through grand declarations, but through small sacred acts of awareness. As you close this chapter, remember that the numbers, the teachings, the reflections, they are not meant to be conclusions. They are invitations. What you've begun here is not a belief system, but a conversation with your soul. And the most important part of that conversation begins now. What will you do with what you've remembered? You don't need to have everything figured out. You don't need to know your purpose as a perfect sentence. You just need to stay in the practice of remembering, of pausing, of choosing with awareness. Your karmic number may shine a light on a recurring lesson, but your awareness transforms that lesson into wisdom. And your wisdom becomes a gift, not just for you, but for the world. So let your life be an offering. Let your healing ripple outward. Let your awakening serve not just your path, but all those whose paths touch yours. Because when one person remembers, it makes it easier for others to do the same. And if this journey has resonated with you, if it stirred something inside you that feels ancient and true, then let it continue. Share this message with someone who might need it. Subscribe to this space of reflection. Like, comment, or watch the other stories we've shared. Not for validation, but to grow a field of mindfulness together. Every act of attention adds to the awakening of the whole. In the end, you are not here to be someone else. You are here to remember, and in remembering to live.